This is a workshop that we've done before. We've done succession planning, but this is one of those very much in case things that we need to have in our pockets. It is best practice for an organization to have 4 succession plans in place all the time. We'll talk more about what those 4 plans are. This one is going to be a little more mindful of emergency succession because as we reopen, we may find that people suddenly are not able to perform the duties of their jobs for one reason or another, whether it's a family member or themselves coming down with an illness. It will happen. It has happened. And we'd like you to be prepared for that and to understand what the steps are that you need to put in place in order to get there. So we are very pleased that Michael Negrón and Joelle Murchison are joining us this morning. We looked at lots of different presenters for today, and these were absolutely the right people. There's such a great plan that they have, a practical plan that you can work with. Stephanie and I worked hard to find the right people, and I think Stephanie and I agree that we surely did. Joelle is new to us. Michael has been with us before, but Joelle is new to us, so we're happy to have her in the fold of New Haven. For the first 15 organizations who registered and who participate this morning, you're going to be able to do some one-on-one follow-up with Joelle. So we are going to send out an email as soon as this is over. You may not know whether or not you're the first 15. As soon as this is over, there's going to be an email that comes out from me to the first 15 organizations to say you are eligible. We're going to ask you not to have a plan ready by next Wednesday, but please let me know by next Wednesday whether or not you would like to use the follow-up consultation. If you don't, we're going to go to the next group on the list so that we use Joelle's expertise to its max, but 15 is the max that we can do. So please let me know quickly as soon as you get the email or by next Wednesday. If you're not going to use it, we're going to move on next Wednesday to the next organization on the list. So thanks again to Stephanie for helping to find and put this together and for all the steps that she's going to be taking care of this morning. Thank you, Michael, for connecting us with Joelle. And thank you, Joelle, for being willing to do this morning. And we're anxious to hear from you. So please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jackie. It is really my pleasure to be with you here today, in particular with my esteemed colleague, Michael Negrón of Negrón Consulting, as we partner to support your beginning conversations for some of you around an emergency succession plan. So if you give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I thought that on this wonderful Wednesday morning, we could use, I know it's a little gray here. I'm coming to you from East Hartford. I had to turn my light on. Normally this time of the morning, I'm really overcome with the wonderful natural light from outside. But I thought we could use a little fun wave, some bright colors to get us going on this Wednesday morning. We are going to talk about emergency succession planning. And what I have leveraged as a tagline is get ready, stay ready. I should say I was a Girl Scout, and my 3 daughters are all Girl Scouts. And one of the things that I remember, I think people most attribute it to Boy Scouts, the notion of be prepared, right? And there's always that challenge that can befall us. As we all know, this year it has been challenge after challenge after challenge. And so it's always important to have some of those conversations that help us to be prepared in the event that there is a scenario that is outside of our scope of expectation. So we're going to talk about that today. We'll talk a little bit about, and these slides are probably backwards. I'll go back to introductions. We'll talk a little bit about general succession planning, and then we will hone in on emergency succession planning. One thing that's important for you to note is that there may be times in the presentation that refer to the lead executive or the executive director or the CEO transitioning out. And you'll find that most succession planning documentation refers to that specific scenario. We will talk about today, and certainly we welcome your engagement as we examine this topic from the perspective of any kind of major transition that impacts your organization. We certainly are sitting in the midst of a significant one right now, whether it be a senior staff person, the executive leader of the organization, someone who is extremely critical to the delivery of a particular service that is a signature service for your organization, a board leader who transitions. So we will examine all of those different possibilities, but just know that if you do see a slide that refers to the ED or the CEO, for your purposes, feel free to, in your mind, position it in the way that makes sense for you. So what I would love for us to do as a way of introduction, two things. One, if you know how to, and I will attempt to walk you through if you're not familiar, on Zoom in the upper right-hand corner, if you toggle over your own photo, there are 3 dots. If you click on them, you can actually rename what your profile appears as. So if you have not already indicated your name, I think most of you have your name indicated, that's great. What I would love for you to do additionally, if possible, is to rename to your name and then also the name of your organization right after your name, if possible. If you have a long name and that is not possible, not a problem, but if you're able to do that, I would appreciate it. Peter, no worries. I have done that for you since that is not possible during the phone. So we do know that you are out there. So for anyone else who needs to make that adjustment, if you would do that, that would be great for all of us to have the frame of reference as we're moving through today. And even if you have other questions directly for individuals, I love to use people's names. The other thing too is if you have pronouns that you choose to use, and now I'm asking a lot, right? There's probably not room for all of that in your profile, but if you do use pronouns that you would like to share with us, please feel free to do that in the moment that you introduce yourselves. And other than that, what I would love for you to do, since we are a smaller group, is if you could, and I'm gonna go around based upon how I see you on my screen. So just be ready, right? Get ready, stay ready. That's our theme for today. If you would be so kind as to unmute, share your name with us, the name of your organization, and one word that will tell us how you're feeling in this morning. So your name, your organization's name, and one word as to how you're feeling this morning. So we are going to start with the first box in, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to start with Michael so that he can model the way. And then we will move. Jonathan, you're on deck next. So just to let you know, we're coming. Okay. Michael, would you begin?
Good morning, everyone. Michael Negrón, based out of Guilford, Connecticut. Grateful.
Thank you. Jonathan.
John Gorham, Mazzaro Community Farm. Hectic.
Hectic. Thank you. Joy. Joy, you're muted. Let's see if we can unmute.
Joy Ford, Creative Arts Workshop.
Thank you. Worried?
Worried.
Okay, thank you. Hisung?
Hisung Ko, East Rock Institute. I'm fine.
Fine. Dave.
Hi, Dave Greco with Arte Inc. And I would say bored and tapped out at this point.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
John.
I'm Proto, the Shoreline Trolley Museum in East Haven and Brantford. And this morning, the word is perplexed.
Perplexed. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to say I saw a name for you before, but it's not showing. Did I remember Melissa correctly? Am I remembering correctly?
She's there.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Your
Yes.
name's back up.
Oh, okay, great.
It was like a memory game for me.
Melissa Mason and New Haven Works. If 2 words, stretched thin and busy.
Yes. Thank you. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Garcia from Arcade's Family Center in New Haven. I am feeling excited about all what we're going to learn this morning, and I feel like my day is going to be very busy, so I feel busy.
Thank you. Jackie. Uh-oh. She went away from us. We'll skip Jackie for now. Anne.
Hi, Ann Coates, Creative Arts Workshop, and I am focused.
Excellent. Thank you. Ingrid. Ingrid, are you there?
Morning, Ingrid from New Haven Works, Ingrid Lewis from New Haven Works. My word is
I'm sorry, what was your word?
excited.
Excited. Thank you, Ingrid. Bobby.
Oh, Bobby Paulette, and from New Haven Preservation Trust, hopeful.
Thank you. Walter.
And Walter Williams III with Walk of Faith Church, and my word is expectant.
Excellent. Thank you. Tracy.
Hi, Tracy Tate, Shelton Historical Society. I think I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Thank you, Tracy. Sharon.
So it's not really Sharon, it's really Val the Ganji. I apologize, Joelle, I did not rename myself. And I'm with the Valley Community Foundation. I apologize that I didn't rename myself, and I'm hopeful.
No worries, we can now do that.
Thank you.
Not a problem. So that we know that Sharon is not really with us. Okay, excellent. Steve.
Steve Worland with Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen. Also, going everyone else, very busy, stretched thin.
Thank you, Steve. Elsie.
Elsie Chapman, New Haven Preservation Trust, also hopeful.
Thank you, Elsie. Sandy.
This is Sandy from VNA Community Healthcare and Hospice, and I feel in transition.
Thank you. Peter. We'll jump to John. Or not. We'll give you all an opportunity to jump in when you have the opportunity, but want you all to feel a part of today. Stephanie, I did not get to you.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. I'm feeling excited.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. So thank you all for participating in that brief moment of introduction and sort of a way to center ourselves as to acknowledge how we're feeling this morning. I would share with you that I am probably a combination. I'm violating my own rule of one word. I'm a combination of energized and, if it makes any sense, overwhelmed at the same time. So I share with many of you in your feelings and thoughts at this moment. And hopefully our time together will be one that is additive and not one that is a detractor from the very busy lives that we have. So let's go to our program. I had shared with you that we will more broadly talk about succession planning, and then we'll sort of zone in on emergency succession planning. We do plan to get you all into some breakout groups for one point, and Stephanie will orchestrate those and we'll let you know. If you have not already participated in breakout groups via Zoom, you will be assigned to a breakout group. You'll have the opportunity on your screen to join the group. There will be a prompt that asks you to click on join. And then you will be transported into a breakout with a smaller group of folks. And we will broadcast to you what you'll be discussing in the breakout group as well, so that if any of you need support there. Michael and I will also be popping in and out of the groups just to check in on you and see if you have any additional questions. But it's a way of building community and engaging and sharing with one another at the stage that you're at within the context of your organization. I suspect we will not get to a second set of breakout groups, but we did have one planned in the event that we do have time. Since we are a relatively small group, we may be able to just simply share together. And then most importantly, as Jackie has already described, there are absolutely next steps for many of you specifically to work directly with me for a period of time to do some planning, but also there are some next steps that you all can take literally from the moment that you leave this call this morning. So with that, we are going to get going. Our objectives for today, introduction to the 3 types of succession planning. We will review a succession checklist document, which you all will have access to, and as well clarify next steps for your own emergency succession plan. So what is succession planning? Of course, we've heard a great deal about it, I'm sure, over the course of your career, maybe even within your organization more intentionally. But essentially, it's a process that helps an organization to accomplish its goals. And what some of it is connected to is the ability to think ahead about those things that could potentially occur so that your organization is ready in the event that there is any event that occurs that might be unplanned or even planned within the context of the organization. So it's really sort of a move forward in time, an opportunity to look ahead to the future to ensure that you have the appropriate tools and resources that you need to be successful to sustain your organization. The benefits, obviously, is that it helps to align your strategic vision with organizational development. Many organizations skip the organizational development piece. We get very comfortable, we have our leaders in place, we have our board in place, we have the appropriate staff people to lead our initiatives, but then we don't think about what happens when that person might walk out the door, right? And so that is something that is really critically important for succession planning. Additionally, it builds the leadership capacity of the team. What do we mean by that? In many nonprofit organizations, particularly in my experience, the organizations tend to be pretty flat. There are individuals who are responsible for very specific initiatives, and they may be subject matter experts in those areas. But what happens if one of those individuals departs the organization? How do you ensure that there's some cross-training, capability by other staff members to lead initiatives if someone else exits the organization for a short period of time or even for the foreseeable future? And so it provides the opportunity to give some visibility to other staff members as it relates to running the organization and supporting the organization's initiatives. Similarly, develops a pool of potential leadership successors. This is the case in most organizations that we don't tend to think that people will leave. I've even had someone say to me in the past, excuse me, that they couldn't imagine anyone else in my role. Right? That's a red flag that tells you that it's really time for you to begin to identify what are those dependencies that the organization has from the perspective of that individual. And how can you ensure that should that individual leave the organization, that you will still be in good footing? Opportunity to diversify the organization's leadership, again, provide some line of sight to capabilities amongst individuals. When we say diversify, not necessarily in the context of race or gender or sexual orientation or ethnicity. In some instances, those are very real opportunities, but also more broadly in terms of skill set. And ensures leadership efficiency. Essentially, all of that says is to ensure that the organization is able to run at its most efficient and effective peak. And that means that there aren't any necessarily hidden surprises that the organization would not be prepared for. Now, the caveat to that, as we all know, is the moment of time that we exist in right now. No one could have prepared for COVID-19, and certainly not for what I've been referring to really as the double pandemic of COVID-19 and a real awareness around racial inequity in our country. So we know that in all best laid plans, there will always be some things that are outside of our scope. But if you need any further reason to believe that succession planning is important, we have some data for you. There are some of you who are definitely data people, so we want to make sure you have some information that helps you to acknowledge that more than 1 in 10 executive jobs turn over each year, right? So even when we are in situations, in fact, I chair an organization that has gone through some significant transition over the last 2 years. And every time I get on the phone with my executive director, she says, so I have some news to share. And I'm like, you're not leaving, are you? So we know that that is very real. There are a lot of organizations out there. We have some incredibly capable people. And so we do have to be prepared for the fact that they may, in fact, transition from the organization. I have also seen situations where an executive director has asked to take a step back. Where the individual says, I really would like to, because of some changes in my family structure, would like to take a step back and serve as, potentially in that organization's case, as the director of development, as opposed to the executive director. So it's not always a situation where the individual leaves the organization totally, but sometimes there's some shift, things both internally and externally that cause people to transition. We also know that in this sector, that a significant number, and this is the case certainly in the private sector as well, that the generation that we refer to as baby boomers are starting to retire, have been retiring, I should say. And so many of them are the leaders of our organizations, and are taking significant institutional memory with them. Even more of them have been founders of some of our organizations. And so again, there's a whole different scenario as it relates to the individual for whom the organization has been tied to, maybe even their brand or reputation very closely tied to a founder. How does an organization transition in that sense? And then, I say at the last bullet, the world is constantly changing. And that really is intended to bundle in all of those things, just like on a job description, the bullet that says duties to be assigned. We just don't know what could be happening around us. And so that is clearly a compelling reason to plan. And so to my point, what is happening around us? We are right now in a global double pandemic. There are things that we are addressing as an organization that we were not thinking about even 4 months ago. There are external forces that are impacting our organizations in ways above and beyond even our own expectations around strategic planning, for example, or simply our regular program year might have brought. The needs of our clients and employees are changing as a result of the pandemic that we are in the midst of. We have situations where certainly there are parents who are navigating, balancing childcare issues, virtual distance learning, as well as trying to balance the responsibilities that they have within a nonprofit. And we know that in the nonprofit sector as well, we tend to run very lean. So you've already got folks who are doing multiple jobs, in some instances have significant responsibilities, and as well have deep passion for the organizations, which requires a lot of emotional effort, if you will. And so the external environment has only compounded that for both our employees and many of us, right? As well as our clients. I say we're in a global double pandemic a second time, not by mistake, because it is a very significant impact and looms very large. And then I think most importantly, our new normal, quote unquote, is yet to be defined. We have no idea, first of all, when we will sort of transition into what the new normal will be, and then certainly what that will look like. So we are in a very uncertain moment in our lives and lives of our organizations right now. And so it might seem like an awkward time to be thinking about succession planning, but in fact, it really is the right time because we are facing challenges that we would not have normally. Now, what keeps us back from doing this succession planning? Probably all of you are thinking life happens, right? Our organizations may be pulled in a different direction. Our programming requires our attention. Our day-to-day operations are our priorities. So it's really challenging for us to take the time out, to carve the time to really think about the organization's needs, to think about succession and sustainability. In some instances, as I referenced, we tend to be very lean organizations. So we may not have a person or time for an individual to dedicate to this work. Even more so, the financial resources, as we know, is a real challenge for many of our organizations today in particular, but had been a challenge if we're honest, here in Connecticut for a while, as we saw a lot of the access to funding begin to shrink, and many organizations in competition for the same limited funding. So we know that this has been a challenge for a while. We often don't have a process in place, or no one knows about it. So when I think about that scenario, I think about my time in corporate America. I worked for United Technologies probably almost 20 years ago now. One of the things that was constantly drilled into our heads was the notion of standard operating procedures, or standard work. And so almost before you could begin a process, there was this expectation that you would follow a framework that allowed you to capture what you were doing step by step. Well, it's great to have the gift of time to do that. But oftentimes, you think of someone in your organization as, oh, so-and-so, yeah, they're the one who run our fundraiser. Dave, he's the one who handles our relationships with our vendors, until one of those individuals is not available. And then you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, Dave has always been able to tell us what to do with this particular vendor, and now he's not here. What do we do, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. We oftentimes, as I mentioned before in my example of someone saying to me, I can't even imagine anyone but you in this position, we focus on the individual, not the organization. An organization that I'm involved with went through that same issue with 2 significant lead staff people leave, who really had been the face of the organization. And so we went through a period of paralysis, if you will, that attempted to, in both instances, get as much information as we possibly could from those individuals, but also help to assure the community around us that they should not believe that the organization was going away because those individuals were going away. Sometimes leadership doesn't want to deal with it. It's just easier to just assume that everything will be as the way that it always is. There is absolutely safety in the status quo. And more so because we tend to be very lean and flat organizations, and because we're strapped with time, we don't often have time to develop our talent as well as some larger structured organizations are able to do. We don't have the ability to provide a lot of job shadowing or preparation or exposure to employees of different roles. We aren't always the greatest about being consistent about evaluations. And even when we do conduct evaluations, what we know is that in many instances, we are fearful of delivering feedback, particularly where there may be an individual who is a member of an underrepresented group. And we may not be sure how to have some of those conversations, right? That's a workshop for a whole nother day, but there is research that proves that in many instances, leaders feel difficulty delivering feedback to individuals who are members of groups that they are not demographically in the same group with. And our mentoring skills are not necessarily developed as leaders. We're good at what we do, but we may not be great at helping other people to get to the level of performance or management that we have accomplished. And I should say, if you have any questions at any point in time, please feel free to use the raise the hand feature or to just indicate in the chat that you have a question. Again, you can also use the chat as a way to communicate if something comes to mind and you want to share. But this is a great opportunity for us. We are going to actually break into breakout groups now and talk a little bit before we get into the nuts and bolts of succession planning. Can you answer these questions for yourself, for example? And just these 3 we're going to think about. And actually, you know what? I was thinking that, no, we will go ahead and break into breakout groups for this discussion. I just want to make sure that those of you who do not have your camera on, if at all possible, if you would put your video on, particularly as we're going into the breakout groups, it's a lot easier to engage in dialogue when you have someone to look at. So if you would please do that, we would greatly appreciate it. We do know that it is early, and we recognize that you may not be in your professional attire, but I'm sure that your group members would be grateful to see your smiling face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these things with you first, actually, and then, oops, that's not what I meant to do. And then we'll break into breakout groups for about 10 minutes, and it'll give us an opportunity to share with one another. So let's talk about it. What I want you to do in the context of the breakout groups is to think about these 3 questions. Now, the image that you see on the right has a number of questions, right? There are about 9. Today, we're going to focus on just these 3. You know, in your organization, who would step in should your organization's leader or a key employee suddenly not be available? Will the organization lose institutional knowledge and contacts if your executive, your leader, or again, a key individual were to suddenly leave? And does your organization have a centralized resource for important contacts and documents? So these are the 3 things that I want you to be thinking about and have the opportunity to talk about in your breakout groups. There is
Joelle,
yes.
Excuse me, this is Michael. I just want to point out to the group that you'll be receiving a copy of the slides. They'll come from either Stephanie or Jackie. So, you know, you don't need to write down everything you're seeing here and all of that. I mean, you can obviously, but just so you know, you'll get the slides. I just want to make one other point, and that is to be compassionate with yourselves about where you are with this. That the fact that you're on this is a great thing. The fact that you're on this call and you chose to take the time to do this. And there's a lot of voices out there being critical about organizations not having emergency funds, you know, rainy day funds and this and that. And I think with the pandemic, we see that even the largest corporations out there in the world are struggling with cash flow and things of that sort. So you're being proactive in running your organization. So I applaud you for being part of today's session. I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Michael, for chiming in. Certainly, you should feel free to do so. Michael is a wealth of knowledge, has worked for a very long time with a number of different nonprofit organizations, and it is really, you know, an absolute partner in this work. So thank you for centering us around that important piece too, right? This can feel overwhelming, particularly if you're approaching this from the perspective of not having a plan in place. And we already, as I identified, in the midst of, you know, some real significant challenges in our reality. So I won't say opposed, but definitely had some challenges with thinking about succession planning because it made him think that someone or the board wanted him out. When in reality, succession planning is just a risk management best practice, right? What happens if an individual is no longer able to uphold their duties, even if for a brief period of time? And so it really demonstrates to us the need to be prepared here. I like to refer to this as the win the lottery syndrome. So someone won the lottery, as opposed to, you know, in some instances we hear people saying, you know, if somebody got hit by a bus, right? We used to say that all the time when I worked in nonprofit. What if you got hit by a bus? Well, the challenge is that, you know, we worked on a pretty busy street in downtown Hartford, and it was actually kind of likely that someone could get hit by a bus. So we stopped saying that. We prefer that you hit the lottery and you make a wonderful donation, an endowment even, to the organization, right? So let's go with that. What can you do in the sense that there is a transition that occurs that you don't expect within your organization? I heard some really, really great suggestions of best practices. There's one organization that shared that they began to develop a user manual the moment they started their role, to capture, right? There's a lot of diligence that's required there to capture all of the things that they were doing in the absence of having had a job description, or in the absence of receiving something like that from their predecessor. And that is required, in fact, of their staff as well, to begin to process through that kind of, you know, that diligence around creating a user guide. There was also an example where one of you shared that user manual or standard operating procedure or contacts listing, you also have shared with your board chair. so that should anything happen, someone who is affiliated with the organization, but outside of the organization has the information, right? So whether that be an electronic document, centralized document area, whether there is a hard copy of it located off-site from the business, should there be, or from the organization, should there be any challenge with access to your location, right? So there are a number of different ways to approach that particular strategy. So I think the best thing at this point, since we've got about 15 minutes left, is to go ahead and move forward to talk about the plan and what a particular plan would look like. There's one other source or resource that I'd like to share with you that Michael and I both thought was helpful in tandem with looking at a checklist as you prepare to think about what's the right conversation to have for your organization around emergency succession. And I pulled these questions out of that planning toolkit. This was done by the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank. And they have a publication, a PDF that we'll provide the link to. Actually, the link is in this document. So when you receive the document, you'll have it. That is a nonprofit executive succession planning toolkit. Again, a lot of what you will find in terms of tools will refer specifically to the ED. But as we've attempted to demonstrate, that we know that those situations can occur even with other key staff in the organization. So a couple of things I want to highlight before we go into, what the checklist looks like from these questions. Should we consider new requirements from those possessed by the departing leader? Now, this is a comment that specifically speaks to more than likely an executive director or senior leader that's leaving. And it's one of the things that if you look at yourself, right, if you are the founder or the leader of the organization, sometimes it's a hard assessment to make in terms of whether or not you currently possess all of the skills and necessary contacts and resources to best leverage that role. Sometimes we can step back and say, I wish I had fill in the blank, right? So maybe I needed more support as from a development perspective. I could have benefited from, having more capability around public speaking, right? So things that you can begin to think about that might be requirements as you look to what a new individual or even a temporary individual might fill in that role. What do you do in the meantime? So there are a couple of different scenarios that were shared where, an individual, as I mentioned before, was ill for a particular period of time, or a key staff person left the organization. So what do you do in the interim? And the first step, as you'll see in the checklist, is to really do a bit of an assessment as to what the organization or that particular position needs and what the risks might be to your audiences, to your clients that you serve, or to your funders. What are some of those gaps that need to be filled? Who will serve as the organization's main contact? Again, that language in that question refers to an executive director, but certainly if there is a key staff person who is the primary contact for a particular program, or the connector point to one of your funders, or a key lead in a relationship that you have with another organization that allows you to execute your program, do you have a backup person identified in any of those instances? Has someone had visibility to those relationships, right? Not just necessarily a listing of phone numbers or email addresses, but have you leveraged the opportunity to bring someone along with you? And many of us, again, we're lean organizations, so we may not have the resources to do so, but it's a critical step in ensuring that there is some sustainability when, as you know, whether it be a funder or a community partner, has another person, another face in the organization that they can call upon should something happen. And again, the last piece I think which many of us worry about is around our funders, and would they be nervous about someone departing or a staff person transitioning? And as I shared, one of the organizations that I work with went through that when two very primary program leaders left the organization. They were the face of the organization to the community and had really won the respect of our funding community. And so we did have to take some significant steps to ensure that they did not see the organization as only those two individuals, but that the capabilities were held within the context of the organization. So first couple of steps that are important in this process, identifying critical staff functions, right? Now you all would say probably every function is critical, right? And that may be true. How do you determine which staff functions are absolutely critical to the day-to-day operation of your organization? Begin to identify those. Name a backup for each function. So beyond the executive director, beyond the leader, even down to the notion of your bookkeeper or your finance person, right? We all know how challenging that can be if we are engaged in a grant and there's some expectations around grant funding spend. Our finance person leaves. Do we have an adequate idea as to what has been expended and what's required? And is the report already in process, right? So how do you make sure that there's a backup person for each function? Develop a cross-training plan, right? Easier said than done. In many nonprofits, though, that is actually one of our strengths, is that we have the ability to roll up our sleeves, and whether you're the leader or a junior staff person, you have the ability to navigate through a variety of tasks because we generally are moved to get things done, right? Our passion moves us around that particular organization's mission to get things done. But have you, again, provided a way for staff, particularly if there's a responsibility that's not identified in their day-to-day responsibilities, but that they might actually be really good at? Right? When was the last time that you sat down with your staff to identify what some of their skills might be that are outside of the scope of their day-to-day work responsibilities, right? We know that that is the case in many instances, particularly for women and people of color, where they serve in roles in volunteer organizations that may not reflect the work that they do day to day in their job. So that is something to consider. How do you have those conversations with your staff in the context of talent development, but also filling some potential gaps within the organization? It sounds just like naming a backup, but it's a little bit different. Identifying who would become acting for the identified critical roles that you identified earlier on. So who might you fill the role with if someone stepped out of the organization for a period of time? Who would you identify as those backups? And that activity will demonstrate to you whether or not you have the appropriate individuals to serve as backups, right? You might say for 2 roles, yes, I know that this person could step in, but there's a couple of roles that I have no opportunity. So how might you leverage to ensure that that work is done? And then specify how or who, particularly this is if a leader is exiting, who will be responsible for acting as the liaison, if you will, between the staff and the board, or the staff and other external entities. Who would be that person who would fill in the gap, particularly if you're talking about for a temporary assignment? So I'm not going to go through all of these slides because they really go in depthly into each of those 5 steps that we talked about, but there are some pretty high level takeaways from each of these slides. One of them in the context of the board responsibility is, and I heard this in one of the groups, the relationship with the board chair, if we're talking about an ED or even a key staff relationship, making sure that the lines of communication are open and that there's clarity as to who is responsible for each of the steps that will be taken in this interim setting, whether it be at the executive director level or simply if you are experiencing a board chair transition. Who will be responsible? Who will be the point person in ensuring that the communication lines remain open? Absolutely critical. I heard many of you talk about this, the importance of establishing documentation with key information for the organization to ensure that there is someone, both inside of the organization and affiliated with. And so that example I would give in terms of someone on the board, a board chair or a board committee chair, whatever's relevant to the particular task at hand, would be critically important. So beginning to put that list together now. I know one of you shared that you literally have included down to email addresses and contacts that you have to make sure that that's accessible and available. The list of consultants that you trust or recruiters, if it's that you need to fill a position, who are your go-to people? I always keep a list of, and some of us have, in addition to our formalized board of directors, but maybe you have a personal board of directors, someone who can help you navigate through some of the challenges. Maybe it emerges out of this group that you might be that role for one another, right? There's someone else whose experience would dictate that you might be able to bounce something off of them. Again, the value of this network. So just to wrap up today, and I know time moves so quickly and there's so much for us to talk about, and I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to spend some time with each of you individually to work through your own individual strategies. But this image really gives you an idea of how important it is that the lines of communication and connectivity are open between the leadership team, whomever the key staff person is that's departing, and whomever is going to be the backfill or the interim. There has got to be consistent and regular communication in order to help the organization move forward and be able to avoid any potential gaps or vulnerabilities in this transition time. So a couple of things that you don't want to miss are listed here. Again, I'm not going to read through all of them. Your own actions, right? And how you behave and respond in this transition time is really, really critical, right? I asked you all in the very beginning, and I'll ask you as a way of closing out, how you felt, right? We all know that in our roles that what we demonstrate to our staff is how they will respond. And so it's okay for us to be overwhelmed and a bit concerned when we're in these moments of uncertainty, because that's real, right? And that demonstrates our transparency and our humanness as leaders. But it is also important as you begin to move through the process to demonstrate your willingness and energy to move forward. Your staff will embrace, your board will embrace what you put forth. Making sure that you are actively inclusive of the individuals on staff or on board committees, if it's a board situation, to engage around future planning. Collaboration is absolutely key. It's clear that many of you recognize that, but sometimes we take collaboration for granted. Does it mean that you have to share everything? No, everything is not appropriate to be shared with individuals across all levels, but it is important to engage folks so that they do understand what is happening, particularly when we're in times of uncertainty. Being open to organizational truths, right? This emergency situation might reveal some things, some stuff, right? We talk about having to clean our own home before things happen. Sometimes when these moments occur in our organizations, it reveals some truths about the organization that we might not have wanted to deal with for a long time. And so be open to that reality and ability to leverage that into hope for the future. So an opportunity to grow and build and develop. I am a glass half full type of person. My ED of the board that I chair will tell you that every time she calls and it's something that could be potentially frightening, I'm like, well, there's a positive side to this. Well, someone's leaving and they've been great. And yes, there'll be a gap for a moment, but it also gives us a great opportunity. So this really is a time to not be sort of stuck in what has happened, but to really think about what can be. This is the succession plan checklist that you all will receive a copy of. This is a framework that we will work through. You may be able to fill in, it's at this link, it's a PDF. You may be able to fill in some of this before we even have an opportunity to connect, but at minimum, we think it is a good sample of the kind of information that you need to have within the context of a checklist. So these are just a couple of screenshots. Specifically, there's a page that speaks to a temporary or unplanned absence, a short-term absence, which is what we could be experiencing now as folks are trying to determine what our new normal looks like at the end of, because it will come to an end, this double pandemic that we're in. I'm confident that it will have to come to an end and we will emerge differently. So what I'll ask you to do is to think about to yourself, based on what you've experienced today and what we've learned, what's one thing that you might do now from this moment going forward? You know, we always get really energized when we learn information. We're like, I'm going to do this right now. So think about one thing, write down one thing that you can do today that, as a result of today's session, that you can do. And the second piece is thinking about how you translate this information to your staff, right? That's a critical component. When we go away to sessions, how do we bring that information back and help the staff to think about what they can do collectively to change the face and the culture of the organization for our ultimate sustainability. So I'd love to close by asking you, well, I should ask you if you have any questions, but I would love to hear from you differently now, maybe, or maybe the same. How are you feeling now in one word? What I would love for you to do is to type it into the chat, since we don't have a ton of time. So if you could just type into the chat, what is one word that describes how you feel now in this moment? And I will read them out. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to tee those up as well. In the fleeting moments of time that we have, I'm seeing inspired, empowered, planful, organized, awakened, hopeful, ready, still hopeful, vision. See, what else did I miss? Any that went by quickly? Nope. Inspired, empowered, planful, organized, awakened, hopeful, ready, hopeful, still, vision, hopeful, playful. All right, who else? There's some others of you out there who have not told us how you feel. We hope you're awake. And any questions that you might have for myself or for Michael. And I want to make sure that, that Jackie has some time just to say some final words before we close as well. I don't see any questions at the moment. Jackie, why don't you go ahead and
Okay. I think everyone is formulating their questions and to work with you afterwards. Joelle, thank you so much. And Michael, thank you for putting this together. This was really just what we were hoping for. It's perfect. A lot of information stuffed into an hour and a half. And as we always say, don't let this be overwhelming. What can you do incrementally toward the goal? You're not going to have a succession plan tomorrow. You're not going to have a succession plan next week. But what can you do to start creating the succession plan or plans that you need to create, and do that incrementally? As soon as I get the checklist from Joelle, I will be sending out an email to each of you because your organizations are all eligible for the 1-hour consultation follow-up. I'll say in the email, and I'll say it here, you may want to use this immediately. You may not know what the first steps are for launching your plan. So if that's the case, then I can connect you to Joelle immediately. You can use her to start launching it and get on your way. Or what you may do is you may sit back, have a sense of where you want to go, work on your plan a little bit, get to a stopping point, get to a place where you start to have some questions, and then use the time with Joelle. But either way, I'd like you to let me know by Wednesday if you're going to use the time so that she can plan her time. We're also going to ask you to use this hour by July 31st. So we can be mindful of her time as she works with so many organizations around the state. We're going to have her in New Haven for now of July. So if you can be sensitive to that, please know that you don't have to use it next week, but you have to let me know. And then we have to use it by the end of July. We are very grateful to you, Joelle. Thank you all for spending your time with us this morning. And as soon as I get the checklist, you'll get that email, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thanks again to Stephanie and to planning. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.